reading from the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 8, 4 through 20. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to govern us. Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, Listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Just as they have done to me from the day I brought them down out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then listen to their voice, only you shall solemnly warn them, and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, These will be the ways of the king who reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and to plow the ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, We are determined to have a king over us, so that we may also be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and may go out and fight our battles. May God add blessing to the reading and the hearing of the word. Being King of England sounds like a pretty good job to me. Seems like there would be a great deal of freedom for a king or queen. The king is in charge, so you can do whatever you want to do, right? Certainly there would be some expectations, and you'd be watched pretty closely. You would be distinct. There's only one king at a time, and there are certain things that you would have to do as king, but it just looks like fun on TV. In January of 1936, Edward VIII became King of England after his father, George V, died. Edward, of course, had been groomed for his whole life for this position. He was the oldest son of the king, so he knew that someday he would become king. In 1939, he was promoted to the position that he had been born for. King of the United Kingdom and of the dominions of the British Commonwealth and Emperor of India. That's a job that a lot of folks would like. But after becoming king, Edward announced that he had proposed to and was planning to marry an American lady named Wallis Simpson. This caused trouble because she had been divorced once and was currently in the process of getting divorced again. The Prime Minister and other members of the government said that it was not appropriate for the king to marry someone who had gotten a divorce. The King of England was also the ceremonial head of the Anglican Church, so it was seen as inappropriate for him to marry someone who was divorced. So they told Edward that he could not remain king and marry Wallis Simpson. So he quit being king. He abdicated the throne. He said that he would rather marry that woman that he loved than be king of England. So Edward's brother became King George. King George's daughter Elizabeth is still Queen of England today. Edward ended up being king for less than a year. He became king in January of 1936 and abdicated the throne in December of the same year. When he was king, he was set apart. He was distinct. The way he lived his life was supposed to be to different standards. If he was loyal, if he did everything right, then it's supposed to lead to a better life for the people around him as well. But Edward made that surprising decision to stop being king, to give up the throne. He decided he just wanted to be a normal guy. He wanted to be able to do whatever he wanted to do. He didn't think that there should be anything distinct or different or restricting him. He said that it was hard to be different. It meant that he was scrutinized, that he was watched, that he was judged, and he thought it wasn't fair. And he'd had enough of it. So he said, I don't want to be distinct anymore. I just want to be a normal guy. It was too much to be set apart. So he chose the more convenient path of being less privileged and less restricted. He just wanted to be normal. In the days of the Old Testament prophet Samuel, who we read about just a few minutes ago, the people of Israel were unique among all of the peoples of the world. The people of Israel were the only ones who understood all of creation to be the work of the one true God. Other countries worshiped various gods. Some had just one God, some had multiple gods, but they all believed that there were various powers, and that each one of these powers had some ability to control some things about the world. Most nations believed that when they fought wars, their gods were fighting against the gods of the other countries to see who was more powerful. But the people of Israel believed that their God was unique. Yahweh is the ultimate power. Nothing else even comes close. Yahweh is not just another God who's somehow more powerful than we mortals. Yahweh is not just one God among many. God is the only God. God is an unmatched and parallel being in a category alone as the creator of everything that exists. And the people of Israel were the only ones who realized this. They were the only ones with this concept of who God is. They are the chosen people, the people who recognize God. And as a part of that special relationship, God gives the Israelites specific work to do. In the book of Exodus, God tells Moses that Israel shall be a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. That connection with God, that relationship and recognizing of who God is, and of listening to what God has to say, comes with a task. The people who know God are called to share that word. They are called to represent God to the rest of the world. People who know God are set apart. They are significant. They're reserved for something special. They are distinct. As a part of knowing God, they also receive the law. They're shown how God wants us to live, how God designed us to live. These people who are aware of God and who are seeking to follow are shown just how they can do that. So the folks who know God, the folks who know what God is doing in the world, those folks are supposed to let that knowledge impact the way they live their lives. Those folks are supposed to be distinct. Their knowledge and their obedience sets them apart. They are covenant people. But in 1 Samuel, in the verses that we read, the people say that they want to be like other nations. They want a king just like everybody else has a king. Now, up until this point, they haven't had a king. There have been a series of judges and of prophets whom God has used to speak to the people. God talks to these leaders and gives them instructions about what Israel is supposed to do. And then these prophets pass that word on to the people. In this way, God directs the people in battle. God settles disputes. God explains how people are supposed to observe religious functions. The word of God has come to the people through the prophets, through the judges, but God has been king. The people have generally trusted God to guide them. Just like their ancestors, the ones that Moses delivered from slavery in Egypt, these people see the presence of God as existing among them, as working for their benefit and as leading them in how to live. God is their king. They are set apart from other nations. But being different isn't easy. Being set apart is stressful. It's hard not to fit in. Standing out like that is a challenge. Just like Edward VIII of England, they did not want to be set apart anymore. They just wanted to be regular folks. Being normal seems so much more appealing than being distinct. So these people came to Samuel and they said, we want a king. We want to be just like all those other nations. This is embarrassing for Samuel for a couple of reasons. At first, he's embarrassed because he takes it as personal rejection. He thinks that in saying they want a king, the people are saying that his style of leadership is not sufficient. He thinks that they're saying he's not good enough. But when Samuel talks to God, God reassures him. God says, they have not rejected you, they have rejected me from being king over them. And that's even worse. Rejecting Samuel seemed bad, but rejecting God, that's another thing entirely. It makes sense to want to move on from Samuel. He's done this work for years. He doesn't have much time left, so something else will need to be put into place. His sons would be the obvious choice, but they're corrupt. They take bribes and they don't appear to have much interest in justice. So the people know that something else must be done. Samuel doesn't offer any better solution, so the people come up with a plan on their own. Save all of us the trouble. They say, keep us from having to worry about these things and just give us a king. Just make us like those other countries. These are the people whose ancestors God freed from slavery under the Pharaoh of Egypt. God has liberated these people. They saw God on the side of the oppressed, and God delivered them from bondage. God made them distinct. God made these people uniquely free. And now they say, no thanks. They are essentially undoing the Exodus. They're saying, we'd like to go back to not being free. We'd like to have someone rule over us again. That's how everyone else does it. So thanks for this whole freedom thing, but we're just going to go back to the old way. God is not pleased about this. God tells Samuel to make sure the people understand what this means. God tells Samuel to make sure the people understand that having a king will mean they are not free in the way that they are under God. Having a king will not be easy. The king will tax their property and will force their labor. Their sons will be made to fight and to farm and to produce goods for the king. Their daughters will be made to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. The best of their fields and vineyards and olive orchards and slaves and livestock will be taken, along with 1/10 of their grain and their vineyards and their flocks. It costs a lot to have a king. This description of how demanding kings can be is true of typical Canaanite kings who were in that area before Israel came to power. And it's an accurate prediction of the way kings like Solomon will treat the people of Israel. The kings will live hugely wealthy and lavish lives, and the people will be responsible for providing that wealth. The people of Israel were called to be distinct, but they decided that they'd rather be like the people around them. Similarly, Edward VIII of England decided that he would rather not be set apart as king if it meant that he was restricted to certain behavior and restricted from marrying the woman that he wanted to marry. So he decided to stop being set apart. Well, as followers of Christ, you and I are called to be distinct. We are called to be defined by something different. In following Christ, we're not to embrace the definitions of success and popularity that are prevalent in this world. Instead, we are looking towards something higher. Life as free people is not easy. Making our own decisions is part of a community. Being responsible for ourselves and deciding how we will respond and follow God, it's complicated. It's hard. That's one of the most challenging parts and one of the best parts of being a Baptist. We take seriously what each person thinks. Baptists are historically a free people. We believe that it's important for each one of us to read the Bible for ourselves. We believe that it's important for each person to pray and to connect with God. We believe that it's important for each person to make an individual decision and to embrace the movement and the action of the Spirit in our lives. Sometimes it's tempting to fall back into that same trap as the people of Israel. Sometimes it's tempting just to say, being free is hard. Being distinct is a pain, so why don't we just become like the people around us? Sometimes it's tempting for us to say, we need a king. We need somebody to tell us what to do and what to believe and what to think and how to act. There's a lot of tension right now in the Catholic Church between the Pope and the hierarchy there in the Vatican, and between the Catholic nuns here in America. The Roman Catholic leadership is saying that the nuns have a lot of their focus in the wrong places. The Pope and the bishops are worried that the nuns are in some ways pursuing too much of a feminist agenda. Part of the problem is the nuns aren't focusing on issues like abortion and homosexuality in the ways that some of the leaders think that they should be. Some of those nuns who are involved in that say that fighting those issues isn't really the best way to be like Jesus. Both of these groups are trying to be loyal to God. The Pope says that certain issues should be the focus, and that neglecting those issues is neglecting the duty that we have to the gospel. Some of those nuns argue that in order to be Christ-like, we should focus on the things that Christ focused on. Jesus talked a lot about things like greed and power and injustice. He focused on poor people, and he made a special point to show love to those who the religious institution has rejected. And the best way to model that, these nuns say, is to selfishly love those who are cast out. People like pregnant teenagers or folks struggling with their sexual identity. The best way to be like Jesus, they say, is to love the people Jesus loved, caring for the sick and the needy and the lonely. The Pope is worried that they'll get out of line, so he's trying to bring them back in line with his understanding of how things should be done. That's why Baptists don't have a Pope. We don't think that anybody can tell us how to be Christians. Nobody can remove our freedom. Sometimes it's tempting to think that it would be convenient to have somebody tell us what to do. It would be easy not to have to wonder about the difficult things, not to have to work through struggles and problems. But like the people of Israel, we are people who recognize something about God. We are people who follow and believe the one true God, and that is complex, it's significant, and it's personal. It comes with the call. It's something that's lived out in community. We're not Christians all by ourselves, but we are followers of God as we interact with each other and as we together seek to find the ways that God is calling us to respond. It may be by speaking out against things that we believe are harmful to people. It may be by focusing on people who are hungry, people who are needy, people who can use the things that we can offer. But it's not something that somebody tells us how to do. There's no checklist of the things that you need to do to fit somebody else's definition of Christianity, because Jesus invites each one of us to accept that person. Jesus invites us to make that our identity, to be connected with him, and to be distinct from the rest of the world. We are in the world. We live here among people, but we are called to define ourselves not by this world, but by something higher. That's not an easy call. It's not an easy thing to look higher than what's around us. It's not an easy thing to embrace the distinction of being people who seek to follow God. But that is our call. Just like the people of Israel, we are called to trust in God. We are set apart for the purposes of God. We are called to define our lives by following God, by trusting God, and by embracing the action of Jesus Christ in our lives. Amen. It's not easy to be different. It's not that hard to come to church for an hour or a couple of hours a week, but to define ourselves throughout our lives as Christians, to define ourselves as people who follow God, is not easy. It's a challenging thing to do. It's challenging to allow that love that Jesus exemplifies to reach through each one of us. It's challenging to allow the Spirit to move through us. It sets us apart. It makes people look at us and say, wow, there's something different going on there. And that's not always something that we want. But it's what God calls us to. Because God says being distinct, being set apart, being followers of Christ is what we are designed for. It's a better way of living. And it's a way that embraces our potential. It's a way that embraces the movement and the love of God now and forever. As we go from this place, let's seek to make ourselves distinct. Let's seek to make ourselves stand out from others as Christians who share the love of God with people who we meet everywhere. Let's pray. God, we thank you for showing us how we can be set apart. We ask you for the courage and the strength and the humility to do so. Help us to realize the value of being defined as Christians. Help us to realize the value of being set apart as your followers. And help us to embrace that call so that we may be your priests to the world. So that we may show other people your love and invite them into relationship and covenant with you. We ask you now that you would bless us as we go in Jesus' name.